Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and to the audience to this session of Biodiversity-Rich Farming Systems. Let's make it happen. This is hosted by DG Agri in the framework of the third edition of the Research and Innovation Days. My name is Tassos Haniotis. I'm Acting Deputy Director General and Director of Strategy Simplification and Policy Analysis in DG Agri. And it is my great pleasure to guide you as a moderator throughout this session. Today, together with our speakers and you, hundreds of participants from the EU and beyond, we will aim to explore how we can make biodiversity-rich farming happen. But before we jump on this challenging task with the speakers, I would like to get to know you. So if you could please use the Slido for the next several minutes and tell me who you are, those of you that are with us today. To access the Slido, you can go to www.sli.do, insert the hashtag ReDaysEU to join the event, and then select channel 2 on the biodiversity. Or you can also simply scan the QR code and select channel 2. So Slido question 1 is, who's the audience with us today? The first answer is a farmer or agri-food business. B, a researcher. C, a policymaker or NGO. And D, any other group that you represent. So while you're introducing yourself to us through the Slido, I would like to invite first Maria Helena Semedo to set the scene for our discussion. Since 2013, Maria Elena is the Deputy Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. She has been the main driving force behind the impactful report on the state of the world's biodiversity for food and agriculture, and the related FAO strategy for mainstreaming biodiversity across agricultural sectors. Thus, I believe she's the best person to set the scene for the discussion by telling us why we need to act now and accelerate the transition to biodiversity-rich farming systems, and what is the FAO strategy in this regard. To this end, she would like to share with us an illustrative video on a personal message.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thanks to the European Commission for giving us the opportunity to discuss the importance of biodiversity farming systems. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown that we must sustainably use our natural resources and restore our ecosystems. Sustainability is at the core of the European Green Deal, with its farm-to-fork and biodiversity strategies, each supporting a transformation to sustainable agri-food systems. Likewise, last year, FAO adopted a strategy on mainstreaming biodiversity across the agricultural sectors, a roadmap to promote sustainable agricultural practices to conserve, enhance, preserve, restore, and sustainably use biodiversity. Still, if we want to see change, we must improve cross-sectoral collaboration with the involvement of all stakeholders, managers of biodiversity, farmers, livestock keepers, foresters, and fisherfolk. Science and innovation are strong allies to ensure that decision-making takes biodiversity into account. In agriculture, innovation means transforming new ideas into action or adapting existing practices, processes, and ways of working to different contexts. FAO's recently created Office of Innovation will strengthen such work and collaborate with other United Nations entities and organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, to be adopted at the United Nations Conference on Biodiversity, will be an indispensable pillar to support the transformation of our agri-food systems in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. If the objective to protect and conserve at least 30% of the planet by 2030 is one of the most visible objectives of the post-2020 framework, we cannot forget the other 70% that we must manage sustainably. FAO continues to work hand in hand with the environment sector along the entire food systems to support the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. In this regard, FAO and the Convention on Biological Diversity will host a global dialogue on the role of food and agriculture in the Global Biodiversity Framework. This 6-7 July 21, and we count on your presence. I wish you all excellent research and innovation days. Thank you.
Although Maria Helena is not with us today in person, I would like to enormously thank her for the illuminating video, and her personal message will stay with us throughout the discussion. She made it very clear that we need to collaborate and take bold and urgent action to reverse the unprecedented biodiversity decline. And in this regard, farming that relies on biodiversity and occupies more than 1/3 of the global landmass holds enormous potential to be a solution space for this great sustainability challenge. I think you are able to see the results of the audience right now, in which we have 7% of farmers, 17% of researchers, 30% of policymakers and NGO, and 46% of this other global category. So this is a pretty diverse audience with a question mark about the other. And now what we have to do is to check how we can unlock this potential. We will discuss with our distinguished speakers, which are going to be Rogier Schulte, Javier Ruiz, and Bea Mas, which I will be introducing as each one is coming into the discussion. First of all, I would like to start with Rogier Schulte, which is going to showcase us examples of innovative farms that put biodiversity-rich farming systems in practice. As many of you know, in the framework of the European Green Deal, the European Commission adopted a package of ambitious strategies, such as the new biodiversity strategy to put Europe's biodiversity on a path to recovery by 2030, and the Farm to Fork strategy for a fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly food system. The two strategies are mutually reinforcing and shall bring together nature, farmers, businessmen, and consumers to jointly work towards a sustainable future. They set concrete targets and objectives, but at the same time, the strategies propose also ambitious actions and provide tools to halt biodiversity loss in the EU and worldwide, and to transform agricultural and food systems into global standards for competitive sustainability. One of the most powerful tools is research and innovation. Hence, through Horizon and the Common Agricultural Policy, working in synergy under the common umbrella of the European Innovation Partnership for Agriculture, the EU is offering unprecedented support to research and innovation as enablers for these strategies. Some say that these strategies are a mission impossible. Our next speaker, Rogier Schulte, will show that actually nothing is impossible with research and innovation. Rogier, in addition to chairing as professor of the Farming Systems Ecology Group at Wageningen University, he is the director of the global network of lighthouse farms. I dare to say that he is a real ambassador crossing the borders between science and practice. In his role, he works closely with farmers that have decided to put biodiversity at the heart of their production systems. So Rogier, can I ask you to showcase some examples of some innovative farms from around the world? You have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Haniotis, for the invitation to share our lessons here today. And also, I think it's indeed really wise to start our journey today with an acknowledgement that to many farmers, this mission of high biodiversity farming feels like mission impossible. Their farming systems have evolved over the last number of decades, and currently their room to maneuver is very, very limited. Now, if I may ask for the first slide on the screen, please, because that shows our journey on finding solutions. One slide back, please. Thank you. What we've done is we've traveled the world over the last number of years to find farms and foodscapes that somehow have managed to escape from the constraints that their fellow farmers find themselves in, and found new permutations of farming systems, new ways of farming as if it is already the year 2050 in terms of rising to the sustainability challenges. Now, we have brought 12 of these farms together into our global network of lighthouse farms. And today, I'd like to highlight 3 of them that put biodiversity at the very heart of their operation. Next slide, please. Let us start very close to home here in the Netherlands, in the polders of what used to be the sea. And here, the company ERF is farming normal crops in a radically new way, in strips rather than in big blocks of monocultures. The same crops, the same total area, but this time in strips. Now, why would they do that? The answer is very simple. By bringing the diversity of crops into the field, there's a diversity of growth stages and biotopes at every time of the year. And this helps with the prevention and the natural control of pests and diseases. Take, for example, potato blight. If that lands in a big field monoculture of potatoes, that can spread in 4 directions, leading to a very rapid outbreak. If the same blight lands in a strip of potatoes, it can only spread in 2 directions, resulting in a slower outbreak. And that's not just theory. In the Diver Impacts study, funded by the European Commission, we've measured these outbreaks, and we've shown that growing potatoes in strips can delay the outbreak of blight by 2 weeks. And those 2 weeks can be crucial and make the difference between a loss and a profit for potato farmers. That's one example where increasing diversity helps not only with providing ecosystem services, but also with the productivity. Does that only work and apply to arable systems? No, let's have a look at the next slide, where we travel to Ireland, to our lighthouse farm at the Lands at Douth, which is a UNESCO heritage site managed by Devonish, where we're trying to change the narrative on the relationship between ruminant farming, nature, and human health. And here we've employed 5 PhD students under the Marie Curie Industrial Training Fellowships who together are designing farming systems, ruminant farming systems that contribute positively to the environment, contribute positively to biodiversity, to mitigating climate change, and indeed to human health. By starting at the soil quality, including diverse swards with more than one species, and then following the impacts of that all the way to farm level, and indeed to the quality of the meat and the human health aspect. Now, those are two examples from Europe. Let's also look beyond our own continent. Next slide, please. Where we go to Brazil. Here we work with our lighthouse farm at Rhizoma Agro in the Atlantic rainforest. Not the Amazon rainforest, but the Atlantic rainforest, one of the biodiversity hotspots in the world. Unfortunately, more than 85% has disappeared because of human activity. Now, what we're trying to do here is recreate the structure of the Atlantic rainforest, but this time using food crops. So we're growing them in 4 successional canopy layers with accelerated cycling of nutrients and indeed organic matter by frequent pruning and mulching. That not only provides us with food and indeed, again, biodiverse ecosystem services, but also, crucially, with these successional agroforestries, we're trying to link the remaining habitats, the remaining fragments of the Atlantic rainforest. Next slide, please. Those are just 3 examples that we're learning from. Together, the lighthouse farms represent the diversity of farming systems and commodities that we see here at the top for different climates, different soils, different cultures, with different diversity of focus on sustainability, a diversity of scales from industrial scale all the way to smallholder communities, a diversity of leadership by women, by men, and indeed jointly by both genders. And most importantly, it connects us to all the other actors in the food system that we need to engage with in order to make that transition happen. So that includes retail, it includes the processing industry, indeed governance actors, and also the knowledge actors that are so crucial in this step. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Rogier. In fact, your lighthouse farms shed both literally and metaphorically light to practices that are bringing actually 2050 already here today. And
that's correct.
This is going to be also a very useful input in our effort in a soil mission that we're proposing to look at what these practices are doing. But such innovative biodiversity-rich farming systems, as were presented by you, need support and an enabling environment to overcome existing challenges, resistance to change, so that they're able to expand and scale up. And other actors and sectors beyond the farming sector play a very important role throughout the whole food system. Javier Ruiz, who is a senior policy officer at WWF, is working exactly with these different actors across sectors on diverse innovative initiatives that create a more favorable environment on socioeconomic conditions for farmers to maintain nature-friendly practices and enable them to diminish the impacts of the transition towards biodiversity-rich farming systems. So I would like to ask Javier to share with us some successful examples of such innovative initiatives. Javier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tassos, for your kind words of introduction, and thanks, of course, for the opportunity of being here today, representing and giving us the opportunity to present some of the work that WWF is doing across the world to support biodiversity-rich farming systems. If I could get the slides, I just have a few slides, but I thought they were very good to bring some pictures of some of the projects we have on the ground. And let me start again. This is going to be quite complementary to the other presentation, the brilliant presentation that we just saw. And we're going to start at the tour. I'm going to go to 4 sites in the world. One of them is in Europe, a continent that is well known for its rich biodiversity associated to farming, but that is also well known, unfortunately, for having lost much of that biodiversity over the last few decades. But of course, there are places where that biodiversity remains. And if we can go to the next slide, you will see one of those places, which is in Romania, an area that still preserves a high proportion of high nature value farming systems. That means that we have plenty of grasslands, we have a lot of semi-natural vegetation. Much of the farmland is kind of in mosaic landscapes, and that gives a lot of biodiversity to these places. What are the threats in these types of landscapes, and what have been the things that have displaced these kind of systems in other parts of Europe in the past? Well, it's a dual threat, actually. Generally, it's very clearly identified that there's two potential threats to these places, and it's basically either farm management gets intensified and we lose, let's say, the biodiversity value of them, or it gets abandoned because of difficulties in economic viability. So what do we do when we want to intervene in these places? What we go and do is try to address those socioeconomic drivers by interventions such as helping with infrastructure, like processing and storage facilities for these producers, better access to markets, diversification of income. It's those aspects that can help us preserve some of these valuable landscapes. We go to the next slide. We're going to travel to Asia, and in particular to India, a place where we are working with farmers in an area that is very rich in tigers. As you will see in the next slide, in the central India landscape, there's a number of protected areas that host as much as 20% of the global tiger population, and those areas are connected by corridors, but corridors that are basically a lot of farmland. Actually, they are farmed corridors. So what's the main challenge in those areas? One of the main challenges in this case is not that is that the farmland could be replaced by urban areas, industrial development. There's a lot of pressure from this type of drivers, and maintaining those areas farmed and farmed in a suitable way is a key item that will help secure the preservation of the target of the tiger in all those areas. So what have we done with those in those areas? We have chosen one of those corridors, and we have worked with approximately 6,000 smallholder farmers in the area with a particular crop that they have, that is cotton, and we've worked with them so that they increase the profitability, the productivity, or the profitability of cotton, in a way that we have managed to both reduce the use of agrochemicals in the area, but also ensuring them to have access better markets and more rewarding markets for that cotton that can get differentiated in the market. The big numbers are that there's a total of 90,000 farms of the similar kind in that area, so there's a lot of need for upscaling of such efforts. Let's continue the trip, and let's go now to South America, also to a place, quite similar to the one that Roger was mentioning earlier, the Atlantic forest. Let's see in the next slide one of the projects we are running in that place. So basically, we are talking about a landscape that has been largely destroyed by now, let's say very clearly, for monocultures oriented to export crops. And there we are working with some grassroots organization that produce yerba mate. As you know, yerba mate is a kind of herbal tea that is consumed very widely in South America and beyond, of course. And we are working with them following the principles of agroforestry and natural pest control to enhance their production of yerba mate. This has led to a lot of replanting of trees, both of productive yerba mate trees, but also the native trees. And we are working with a beverage company to also, again, help these producers access some more demanding markets, get better rewards, and ensure they have a better income. We have done this in association with grassroots organizations that have been, and one of the key areas of work is the empowerment of women, who are, after all, the ones that are behind the production of yerba mate, and creating opportunities for the youth to stay in rural areas rather than go to cities. One last example, and for this last example, we come back to Europe in the next slide. And I wanted to present you very, very briefly the Citrus project. So it's a project that I will describe in the following slide with a bit more detail, but it's basically a farm-to-fork approach to have more biodiversity-friendly farming. So basically what we are doing is we are connecting producers of oranges and mandarins in the south of Spain, in Andalusia, with consumers in Germany, in collaboration with a major German retailer, which is Edeka. And basically what we are doing is to address some of the key environmental challenges related to the production of these oranges and mandarins. In this case, it would be water depletion, high use of agrochemicals, and generally low biodiversity levels in these orchards. And we are asking producers to improve on all those matters. And what are we offering in exchange? We are offering a lot of support, advisory support, people coming from WWF and other organizations coming to support the producers in that transition. But crucially, what we are offering them is that security to producers to sell appropriately their products in Germany with they secure long-term contracts with these retailers, so therefore they have a warranty of sales for a few years, and that's secure. That's really engaging them in the process towards transition to lower impact agriculture. This was my last example, so I leave it there for the moment, and happy to discuss more later in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javier. In fact, Roger and Javier showed us very clearly what is possible and not futuristic, but is already happening on the ground. But let me pass into another angle of this discussion and ask Bea Maas, who's a researcher at the University of Vienna and coordinates and advises international biodiversity conservation projects in research and practice, to tell us why in a recently published scientific article she stated the following, and let me quote just to make sure that I quote it correctly: biodiversity-friendly management is pivotal for sustainable agriculture, but rarely put into practice by farmers, despite mounting evidence of the social, environmental, and economic benefits of such practices. But I have to admit that as somebody that has been involved in agricultural policy for a little bit over 30 years, I'm not very much surprised by your statement. It's true that 20 or odd years ago, we didn't really focus that much on biodiversity. More recently, we have much more examples that things work on the ground, and yet we still find this resistance. So what I would like to ask you is, why do you think it's the case that these biodiversity-rich farming practices are still in their infancy, despite the fact that we have an enabling policy environment and all these innovations on the ground? And what would you recommend to agricultural scientists, policymakers, and stakeholders at large to change the state of play? The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this important question and the opportunity to speak about our work here. Yeah, indeed, we have a lot of evidence how important biodiversity is for farming, for food production, and many other aspects of human well-being. Our health, our safety, and overall life quality depends on biodiversity. Just to name two examples, 75% of our crops require pollination by animals, mostly insects, and many pest suppression services of predatory species correspond to billion-dollar services for many cash crops worldwide. And biodiversity can make farms more resilient against disturbances such as diseases, climate change, but this also depends on the farm management. The good news is that we are more than aware about these benefits. We do have many concrete solutions for biodiversity-rich farming at hand. And we do not only know that we need to integrate biodiversity conservation into agriculture to be sustainable, we also know how to do this. We have the evidence, but we are not doing it efficiently, not yet. We have to face that available evidence and policies are not put into practice enough still. The idea, for example, of the Common Agricultural Policy to achieve higher farming sustainability is great. Also, its budget is great, 2/3 of the overall EU budget, but it's not working out yet. For example, farmers can receive payments by voluntary participation in agri-environment schemes, but there are several issues, such as, for example, the unfair distribution of payments. 20% of farmers receive 80% of the payments, or the lack of funding for smaller and more sustainable farms, as we saw in the first talks here, which would be really important for biodiversity promotion. Or a third issue, just as an example, the lack of transparency and inclusion that prevents more efficient implementation processes. To understand better why we are facing these knowing-doing gaps and what we can do about it, we designed an international and transdisciplinary survey. We asked 306 farmers and environmental scientists from Germany and Austria how important they perceive different facets of biodiversity, associated services, and ways of information transfer important for agricultural decision-making. We had a total of 44 questions in the survey, and to our knowledge, it's the largest available survey on these topics to date. And the results showed clear differences between farmers and scientists. And this is providing important implications for improved biodiversity conservation and biodiversity management on farms. Within the three larger themes of the survey, all related to biodiversity, its management and communication, we found that scientists rated almost all items as highly important and significantly more important for agriculture compared to farmers. Also, we show a clear difference within the group of farmers depending on demographic factors. So, for example, farmers with higher completed education levels, as well as female farmers or farmers practicing organic farming, perceived biodiversity and related functions as significantly more important than less highly educated male or conventional farmers. Our findings also support critical assessments on persistent communication and implementation gaps. So, for example, farmers perceived scientific evidence as the least important information source for agricultural decision-making, while direct, verbal communication was assessed as the most important pathway for agricultural decision-making by both farmers and scientists. In conclusion, our findings from this study and related work that we did can be summarized actually in one key recommendation: promote better collaboration and communication between research, practice, and policy. Specifically, this would need to be more integrative, more targeted, and more clear. So bring together all relevant perspectives and skills on sustainable farming, for example, by promoting the active involvement of farmers as equal counterparts in research and policy. We need to promote more scientific communication that will help to improve research and policy and also the innovation in this process. So this is what we focus on in a nutshell, and I'd like to emphasize just one final point. A high level of diversity of different species and functions is not only important for the health and resilience of ecosystems, but also among our own ranks. So collaboration across different disciplines and perspectives makes us more innovative, more productive, and more impactful. And we all want a sustainable future with less crisis. And to make it happen, we need to support diversity at all levels. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Bea, for your very insightful comments. What I retain from there clearly is one of the main issues that we have identified as we were preparing the proposal for the future CAP and also the Farm to Fork strategy, that there is a huge need to bridge the gap between science and practice. What we're trying to do in the use research and innovation program, especially in the areas of agriculture, is to try to promote multi-actor approaches to partnerships that upscale agroecology. We have this ambitious mission in the area of soil health and food, which is extremely important because we have the paradox, if you want, in the European Union not to have a directive on soil, and yet to have a policy whose leverage is exactly on soil management tools. And may I add something that we are proposing also through my directorate, which is to turn a network of data on the economics of the farm, the so-called FADN, into the Farm Sustainability Data Network. It's not just a change of name. It's not just the addition of indicators that are pertinent to soil management and biodiversity, but it's a better link of this network to advice provided to farmers and to input that will be given to the scientific community to be able to see what works, what doesn't work, and what needs to be changed. But before I ask Roger and Javier to identify what they consider to be the key policy and research and innovation needs to increase attention on issues in biodiversity in farming, I would like to ask the audience for the next Slido question, which is, where would you think yourselves that we need to focus in terms of future research areas? More basic research on the benefits of functional biodiversity, for example, the beneficial interactions between plants and soil organisms. More applied research and innovation to design, test, and upscale more complex biodiverse farming systems, with the involvement also of the end users. More socioeconomic research to identify, to overcome barriers for the adoption of more complex farming systems, or you see other needs. I've been in my very remote past also a researcher myself. So for those of you researchers, please, you cannot click all. You have to prioritize here. Okay, so as you go ahead and answer this, I would like to ask Rogier and Javier to come up with their comments and suggestions in this particular area. Rogier, you have 3 minutes for your comments.
Thank you very much, and let me take up that challenge and add another to the list that indeed all of the above are important. But I would call also very much for a need for research and innovation on systemic solutions. Because at the end of the day, we can recommend practices, we can recommend measures for farmers to implement, but farmers have to implement these within an operational farm system. And if we're talking biodiversity, even larger than that, within a landscape. And what does that mean? It means that often it's not a case of just rolling out a measure. Farmers are bombarded with ideas and options for different measures. And take, for example, in Ireland, that I showed a slide on, where they've started to work with multi-species swards, having mixtures of grasses and forbs for the animals. And that impacts directly on the nutrients requirements, on the soil quality. It also impacts directly on the nutritional value of the feed that the animals get, on the labor requirements throughout the year. It impacts on both the costs and the income on the farm, and ultimately on human nutrition. And it's always up to the farmer to make that work within an operational farm system. And that is where farmers need help. All these good ideas are being offered to them, but how can I turn that into a working farm system at my farm system level, and indeed at landscape level? So that's one. Now, it goes without saying that what works for Ireland, the system that we're developing there, doesn't necessarily work for an arable farm in the Netherlands, as we've seen. Or, for example, if we look at Spain, the main challenge there at our lighthouse is land degradation and indeed increased droughts in the face of climate change. So each lighthouse farm, but indeed each farm in Europe, needs their own tailor-made package, their tailor-made solutions. And therefore, there's a real important role there for decision support tools and decision support systems that allow us to bundle all that knowledge that is being generated and turn that into practical farm advice. The final point is the need for us to think outside the constraints of today. The lighthouse farms show what is possible. Indeed, then there is a whole package of work, as Bea has referred to very aptly, in bridging that gap between thinking solutions and doing solutions for all those other farms to follow. And we need a lot of social insights into those. But in thinking futures, we should make sure that we don't constrain ourselves in our thinking and in our designing by the constraints of today, but that we can think outside the constraints of today and come up with and give room for innovations outside the solution space of today. Now, we use models for that, and indeed the lighthouse farms can ground those models. So that is a call for innovation beyond what is constraining the farmers in today's practices. Those would be my 3 recommendations going forward.
Thank you very much, Rogier. And your calls and recommendations, Javier?
Yes, maybe one thing that you may have noticed when I presented the projects that we are involved in across the world is one common thread is one that was also underlined by Rogier earlier, is that is the socioeconomic challenge that is making the transition or the maintenance of biodiversity-rich farming happen. So I would have, in principle, a preference to look because that's no easy challenge. I mean, when you're talking about socioeconomics, in the socioeconomics that farmers are operating is possibly one of the most difficult challenges that they may be facing. And how do you, with those degrees of freedom, operate is something that is particularly difficult. And you may have noticed that we've used quite similar strategies all the time as WWF to support the biodiversity-rich farming. It's all about providing a little bit of differentiation in the market, linking it to some companies, linking it to some better production, linked to some marketing around it. But at the same time, that is also a terrible mistake, if I can call it so. It's a terrible mistake because in a way you cannot upscale that to the whole farming community in an area. Why not? Because you cannot differentiate all the time. You can differentiate in a market that is, let's say, at a lower level of sustainability, you can differentiate one product. So we need to have also brighter ideas, and that's why we need to call also on research and innovation community to come up. How we are going to make it possible for these ideas to be upscaled in a way that we are also able to make these biodiversity-rich farming approaches possible at a larger scale. We do believe that policy has a crucial role to play. But for the moment, what we have also seen is that too frequently policy decisions, even those that supposedly are oriented towards biodiversity, are too biased, let's say, by the socioeconomic factors. They need to do something on the difficult socioeconomic situation of many farmers and fail to deliver as much as we would need on biodiversity. So we truly need to look at those combined aspects so that we can really upscale the solutions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Javier. If we could show on the screen, please, the results of the answers to the Slido, because the answer actually given, I don't know if you can see it, is pretty much along the lines of what I think EBS would be very happy. Yeah? What we need is more socioeconomic research to overcome the barriers for adoption. That's what the majority of you have said. So I can give you, in the interest of time, I only have you have 1 minute to say if you're very happy with what you see and whether you think that could allow us to move further in making this more widely applied than today. Bea?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Absolutely. Yeah, it's very great to see this agreement with also what we find, and also our experience, what we see in the field, that the time seems to be right to increase this collaboration, and we have the tools at hand. We know already what to do, and now it's time to act.
Good. Thanks. I'm glad that we all agree on that, at least those of us that have participated here. The time is running short, and it's time for some concluding words. As usual, when you chair a session like that, you moderate a session like that, there's always a high risk in the type of conclusions that you derive. I don't think there is much risk today, because one thing that is clear is that biodiversity-rich farming systems exist already today. And that's something that came clearly from the discussion. But to make it happen in a greater scale, what we have to do is do certain things that are important, including reinforcing the multi-actor approach, and that's where more research on the socio-economic regions where we have this resistance to change becomes very important. And what we also have to do is make very clear that there is a need for a wide diversity of innovative systemic solutions. If I may, in my speeches, I like to say that there is no monopoly of best practices, but there is a healthy competition among them, provided that we know what are the results they bring about, and that the level of ambition that they have to apply increases overall. And finally, we need also to further work to have supportive policies to upscale the innovations. I wouldn't mind if some of you get on my shoes and see what is the difference between making a policy proposal and seeing the outcome of it. But whatever it is, I think it is important to see that step by step, there is always progress being made. And the better we communicate these best practices, the better we communicate what is really happening on the ground, the more we will have the capacity to overcome resistance to change and move in the direction we all want. So with that, and without further ado, I would like to thank enormously our speakers who have shared with us their valuable insights, those of you that participated and gave us, even in the brief form of a Slido, answers your insights. And I hope you enjoyed the session and enjoy the rest of the Research and Innovation Days, and have, wherever you are, a nice afternoon and evening, all of you. Cheers, and stay healthy.